Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. This is part 2 of our video on Penda's Fen. So we're just going to pick up exactly where we left off. So if you've not seen part 1 yet, I definitely recommend that you start with that, and you can find a link to that in the description below. So a piece of music that runs all the way throughout the film and is both very important to Stephen. So we both hear the music and also hear primarily Stephen discussing it and relating to it, and we get his understanding of it and his developing understanding of it as the as his own arc progresses. Is a composition by the English composer Edward Elgar called the Dream of Gerontius, which was first performed in 1900. Now, Elgar is really, I think, really not known in the United States anyways. I'm not sure how prominent he is in sort of the common understanding in England or in the UK. But yeah, I think very, very much not known in the United States. I'm no expert on modern classical music for sure, but I'd never even heard of him prior to watching the film here. But at least in the way that he is presented in the film, he's presented as if he's a quite significant figure in modern English music and culture. And I think at least in Stephen's understanding, Elgar is really connected to Stephen's national pride. So the Dream of Gerontius is Elgar set to music, a poem by the English Catholic theologian that was written in the 1860s, John Henry Newman, which it's in two parts. So in part 1, an old man named Gerontius, who's just kind of presented as a sort of everyman, not particularly saintly or sinful, but he is dying. And then in part 2, we have him begins the dying process. He moves on to the judgment, and he encounters an angel. He encounters demons, and so we get this kind of tour through the afterlife and Catholic sort of theology, and we see the process of him dying and being judged, and then in the end being granted a glimpse of God. And his own, obviously attains to salvation. So Elgar somewhat shortened the poem and set it to music. And as Stephen notes, despite the fact that he and his family are Protestants, that he still sees great, spiritual and as well as artistic significance in this composition, and it obviously means quite a lot to him. But as the film progresses, he will gain a much more complex and nuanced understanding of this composition and its meaning, and of Elgar as well, including the fact that Elgar had some Welsh blood, so that Elgar himself doesn't fit into the Stephen's attachment to that pure English identity that he begins the film with. So early on in the film, we hear. The film opens, when we're getting those early shots of the Malvern Hills. We're hearing from towards the end of the composition of the Dream of Gerontius, like building up to the big kind of like climactic moment, and we hear Stephen discussing the Elgar and his understanding of the composition. And so Stephen says of Elgar, to be a man, have heaven and hell between your ears, and to write them down in notes, and walk those hills, and hear the angel and the demon, and hear the dissonance that is the piercing glance of God. So here we get the introduction of angels and demons from the Dream of Gerontius, which features both an important angelic character, a choir of angels, and then we also hear demons as well as the angel and Gerontius sort of pass over, and I think Gerontius doesn't actually see the demons, but they hear them from afar as the demons kind of shout and mock Gerontius and the angel. And so Stephen is admiring Elgar's ability to hear this sort of heavenly and infernal voices in his head, to hear both and to contain all of that that kind of cosmological sort of richness within himself, and to be able to express it through a work of art, and then also connecting that to walking those hills. That Elgar's music was so rooted in that particular place and was inspired by his walks through those hills. There's also a really interesting development here with the concept of dissonance, which is actually referenced in the play, or in the work, The Dream of Gerontius itself, where when the Gerontius and the angel first begin to hear the sounds of the demons, their voices are referred to as dissonant, and yet the real great moment of dissonance is the really shattering sort of climax of the composition, where Gerontius is granted this sort of brief, the piercing glance of God, as Stephen says it, which is the most like dissonant moment, compositionally speaking. So there's an interesting dissonance itself has an interesting sort of double significance. It's both connected to the demons, but then is also connected to the shattering effect of the glance of God. And so as we'll see, the concept of dissonance, both its aesthetic or musical concept, and then a broader kind of social sort of meaning of dissonance is really developed, and it has the same sort of quality that Mud and Flame has, of being kind of on both sides of oppositions, both sacred and profane, both of the light and of the darkness, sort of simultaneously and between them. Interestingly, we also get early on in that speech that we talked about, that Arn gives at the council meeting. Arn also mentions Elgar when he's talking about the landscape and its perversion by these secret military installations. Arn says, "Poets have hymned this landscape. Our greatest composer has enshrined it." Our greatest composer being Elgar, which Stephen is rather struck by this man that he, at that moment in the beginning of the film, that he detests so much and feels himself so opposed to, that Arn would also admire Elgar so much, is a striking moment for Stephen. The music is also used in kind of a clever way to structure the film itself. So early on, when we're hearing, at first we're hearing the music, over the shots of the landscape, but then it is revealed that the music we're hearing is actually diegetic, that it is being played on Stephen's record player in his bedroom, and so we hear the music building towards that conclusion and towards that final glance of God. But basically, right before we get there, Stephen's mother comes into the room and picks up the needle because she says that his father's working and that the music is too loud. So we get the kind of thwarted climax of the music at the very beginning of the film, and then we don't actually hear that final dissonant chord of the glance of God until the last, I think it's about 5 minutes before the end. So you almost get this nice kind of unresolved bit of music at the beginning of the film that doesn't resolve itself until the conclusion, which is just a nice kind of detail and gives that, similar to the way that the opening and closing shots of the landscape are symmetrical, with the shot of the hills and then from the hills. We similarly get this nice kind of final resolution of the unresolved chord from the beginning. We're not going to spend too much time on this. Another of the visionary sequences in the film is when Stephen, coming into some sort of a shack or a little shelter to shelter from the rain, encounters in this building a kind of apparition. It's sort of ambiguous whether he's actually encountering the spirit of Elgar, or this is simply happening in Stephen's own imagination. And ultimately, I think the movie doesn't really care that much about those types of distinctions, but in any case, Stephen encounters the kind of the spirit or ghost of Elgar, and has this conversation with him. There's a few interesting things come up in the course of this conversation, but I just want to focus on one, I think, important detail from Elgar's kind of rambling reminiscences of his life and about his music. So he refers to Gerontius's the deathbed cry that we get towards the conclusion of part one of the Dream of Gerontius. And then Elgar says, "Where did I pluck the sublimity of that? From the angels? From the air? From a dog? His master had refused him a bone. My Gerontius's transcendental deathbed cry, I musicked from the wine of a dog for a bone." So I think this is another really beautiful image of mud and flame, that this transcendental moment within the musical composition should be taken from something as sort of profane as the whining of a dog. I think is a really another nice moment of driving home that theme of the angel and the demon of mud and flame coexisting and interrelated with each other. We also get Elgar here also, he reveals to Stephen a kind of a secret about one of his compositions that no one else had figured out, and then says that they haven't been unable to figure it out because they have no demon for counterpoint. So nice, just a little reference there with the use of demon, where here demon means something is related back to the concept of a genius, this kind of like tutelary spirit that inspires them here. So we see demons being connected, to inspiration and artistic, capacity and perception. Right, and then, as I just mentioned, we finally get, just before the final visionary sequence, we have Stephen alone in the church playing the organ, where he goes through some of the major themes, and including themes that we've heard throughout the film, and then finally that climactic sequence that was thwarted earlier at the beginning of the film, he finally plays on the organ, and then even intensifies the dissonance. He even adds, sort of extra notes into it to create an even more dissonant. Earlier in the voiceover, he describes that chord as the most shattering moment in all of music, and here he's really like doubling down and extending the chord and making it even more dissonant than it is in the score, as if really leaning into that dissonance and all of the feeling and that sort of spiritual shattering revelation connected with that dissonance. And then as this is happening, we see a crack running along the aisle of the church that progressively widens as we draw to that final shattering chord. Though this crack is revealed to be another sort of vision and not literally there. So running along parallel to the other sorts of transformations and developing understanding that we've been talking about, his own self-understanding, his understanding of his home and the landscape around him, and also his understanding of Elgar and the Dream of Gerontius. We also have a developing understanding of, well, sort of together, of both Christianity and his father. So Stephen doesn't reject Christianity, at least not entirely, but rather the film seems to imply a kind of rooting of Christianity or a return to the authentic kind of pagan and local origins of Christianity, that which is sort of perverted by the church and the institutionalization of Christianity. And running along with this, we also have a deepening and sort of complexifying understanding, or Stephen has, of his own father, who, as we said, is a rector in the Anglican Church, and Stephen comes to find that his father holds, beliefs that the church would consider to be, heretical, that he's something of a dissonant voice, within the church. So while Stephen is searching for the place name book, to look up the etymology, the origin of the name of the village, Pinvin, he also comes across part of a manuscript written by his father, which is titled The Buried Jesus. So another reference here to the concept of burying and things being hidden and concealed underground, but needing to be dug up and revealed. For a variety of reasons. I mean, we've already seen that the concealing of these sort of secret military installations is very different than the concealing of the pagan past of the land. That not all of these things that have been buried and concealed are things that need to be recovered, but they all need to be dug up and exposed and understood, and not allowed to kind of fester, forgotten underground in their kind of repressed unconscious state. And here we get. Just another version of that. This time with the idea of a sort of a true Jesus behind the perverted image, transmitted by the institution of the church and its intertwining with power and authority. So Stephen flips through this manuscript that he finds of his father's, and we hear a few excerpts from the manuscript, including, I think most significantly, his father writes, "To the reader who shouts blasphemy, I say, blasphemy worse, that the name of this life-enhancing revolutionary Jesus should be dangled like a halo above a sick culture centered on authority and death." All right, so coming back to that long conversation between Stephen and his father, which is really the lead up to the scene in the church where we finally get the production of that dissonant, shattering chord. In this conversation, Stephen and his father discuss Joan of Arc and her what exactly she was and her significance. Now, the theories that they discuss here are obviously drawn on some of the works of Margaret Murray, in her book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, which is now understood. Her thesis in that book about the survival of ancient pagan religion inside of Christian Europe, and there being a kind of continuous but secret pagan tradition, which that idea is going to be really familiar to anyone who has any acquaintance with sort of Wicca and modern neo-paganism. Murray, alongside people like Gerald Gardner, were huge influences on that developing idea, which is now understood to not be historically accurate, but Rudkin is obviously drawing on it, as he's writing this film. So we hear Stephen's father saying that Joan of Arc, was a witch. And he says, there is some evidence she might even not have been Christian, but that she practiced the old religion. So again, this is something that Margaret Murray believed to be true, but is no longer accepted by scholars. And he goes on and says, when a church, any church, goes to war against an older god, it has to call that older god the devil. In her last moments, we are told, she screamed through the flames to Jesu, Jesu. So here we get, not only this really relativizing of the church's concept of good and evil, or orthodoxy and sin and all these ideas, but even that devils, which obviously connects with the concept of demon and the increasingly complex understanding of demons and the demonic that has been developing throughout the film, now related to their rejection by the church and its orthodoxy, which they construct for the purpose of maintaining power. And then his father continues on and says, "Whom did she see? The plaster Christ of the cathedrals, or her old elemental village god, the son of Adam, son of man, the torn, flayed hero bleeding on the tree? The old man god, unchanging, ever-changing, Samson, Marduk, Jesus, Balder, Heracles, by whom the earth is haunted since the first beat of the heart of man." So here we have, now this is interesting that she, at least in the particular telling of this version of the story in the film here, that Joan cries out to Jesu, Jesu, as she's being burned, which is also the name that is used in the Dream of Gerontius, as if to suggest that, despite the poem of the being written by a Catholic, totally Orthodox Catholic theologian, that somehow there's some, hint or, unknown and unconscious, some seed of something heretical, something pagan, still lurking, within the Catholic orthodoxy there. It's just a nice little detail there for anyone familiar with the Dream of Gerontius. So in the Father's talk here, this idea of the village god, the elemental village god, this relating to their discussion of pagan and the meaning of the word pagan, and the actual origin of the word pagan and why it acquired the meaning that it did is sort of a complicated question, but here it's given the explanation of being related to the idea of the rural, the people outside of the cities, who in the early days of the Christian Roman Empire, still maintained their older ways. So connecting it to that, the elemental village god, as if, again, kind of rerouting the origins of Christianity in something, eternal and universal and pagan, but at the same time as eternal and universal, also, also local and particular, and opposed to the monolithic structure of the church and its authority. Now, for anyone, especially if you're familiar with the works of Aleister Crowley or probably a lot of other contemporary 20th century esoteric or occult authors, some of these ideas being presented here will be pretty familiar, obviously drawing on some of the same sources that Crowley was really inspired by, like the writings of J.G. Frazer and the Golden Bough, and some of these ideas that are now not considered scholarly, reputable, but about these eternal kind of archetypal sort of figures, and Jesus being just sort of one version of this, this idea of the dying and resurrecting figure, the man God, the son of Adam, the torn flayed hero bleeding on the tree, as the Father presents it. And then in that scene that we talked about a few minutes ago, where Stephen plays the organ in the church, and he has that sort of vision of the crack running down the aisle. He also has a second vision running alongside it, where there's a sort of mirror sitting on the organ, presumably so that the organist can see what's happening in the church behind them. I presume. But anyways, in this, the mirror turns black, and then we see in the mirror this image of just the feet of presumably of Jesus crucified here, and we hear his voice, or Stephen hears the voice saying, "Stephen Franklin, unbury me, free me from this tree." So here we have the idea of unburying, again, relating to back to the title of his father's book, the Buried Jesus, and so now we have this figure calling on Stephen to unbury him, and then relating back to that with the Father referring to him as the man God, torn or flayed and bleeding from the tree. So now him asking to be freed from this tree, to be freed from his burial, by the church and its authority, to be returned to his sort of pagan origins here. Right, and then just returning one final time to this conversation between Stephen and his father, continuing on this his transformed and rather heretical discussion of Jesus and his understanding of Jesus and his returning to him, away from the way that he's been corrupted by the authority of the church and its propagation and maintenance of its own power. The Father says, Jesus was a revolutionary in the most elemental sense. In him alone, the legislator and the demon fuse. So here we see Jesus as, much like Penda himself, will be presented as, sort of combining the angel and the demon, or mud and flame, the darkness and the light together. Now we see this buried Jesus as similarly, containing these opposites. implicit here, and as will be developed in the final appearance of Penda, the demon is also associated with the revolutionary and the power of disobedience and to move against or to disobey authority and power. That I think is probably the most basic connection that we have between Jesus and the demon here, is that he is a figure of disobedience who speaks out, against the corrupt and domineering and exploiting powers of his time, and that recovering the true message of this revolutionary Jesus is to also to bring in the demonic and to see that revolutionary power within the darkness and the demon and the mud and the flame within the flame within the fen. And then the final line here, he says he has been taken over just as Marx was taken over. So obviously drawing some kind of connection here between the way that the church, perverted and corrupted the true revolutionary message of Jesus, with presumably the way that the bureaucracy running the Soviet Union, perverted and corrupted the teachings of Marx. All right, so another thing that appears in the film in this similar sort of bookending structure that we've already seen several times is the hymn Jerusalem, which is the setting to music of the William Blake's poem, which we see early on in the film, very close to the beginning. We have the boys in the school singing the hymn, accompanied by Stephen on organ, and then rather towards the end of the film, we have in the headmaster's final address to the boys of the school as they're finishing up and preparing to leave. In his address, he recites the hymn here. So we get it, both at the beginning and at the end, with the implication that Stephen's understanding of this hymn and its significance has been similarly transformed, and that he now has an understanding that is deeper and more complex than what he began with, and that presumably what the headmaster and the other boys around him would understand. So as the headmaster refers to in this final speech, the hymn Jerusalem has become a kind of unofficial second national anthem for England. So presumably at the beginning of the film, Stephen would have understood it in this way that is totally consistent with the kind of English nationalism that he subscribed to, and would have understood the hymn in that context. But now with these new revelations and understandings, in the same sort of way that he can understand this sort of pagan, kind of heretical, revolutionary Jesus, he can also see Blake in the same way. And I think again, this isn't explicitly developed, but you could totally say the same thing about Blake that Stephen's father says about Jesus and about Marx, that there's a really revolutionary and heretical Blake who is really opposed to power and the authority and domination by power and the state and the church, but that Blake has been, and his words have been, perverted and twisted to a nationalist usage, that buried. So Blake could be said to be similarly buried, and that Stephen now in this final appearance of it can unbury Blake and understand the really radical and revolutionary content within Blake and within the words of the hymn. So both times that we encounter the hymn, we hear some of the same words. There's some we don't hear exactly the same passages, but there is some overlap. And in the second verse, the first two lines of the second verse, we hear both times. And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? So I think we're obviously meant to hear in hills the idea of the Malvern Hills, right, in this particular landscape, and that the countenance divine, shines on those hills, which, Stephen is now going to understand in a very different way, rather than the presence of this, institutional, sort of patriarchal Christian God, but instead here something within the land, the flame within the fen, rather than simply the kind of the blessing of the heavenly sort of patriarchal deity of official Christianity. one other line just to point out here that I think is interesting, and I can't imagine that Rudkin wasn't thinking of as he was writing this, is that, so in the setting to music of the hymn, was it Hubert Parry, I believe is his name, who set it to music? He changed the line where, so Blake writes, "And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills?" But Parry changes this line to "those dark satanic mills," as if setting it in the past, right? That this is no longer, that the dark satanic mills are no longer here, but something that existed in Blake's time in the beginning of industrialization, but is now no longer here. So this is another, I think, way that Blake is sort of buried, and the criticism of power and of the sort of capitalist and industrialism is softened or really sort of thwarted by this changing of the words here. But this idea of Blake's sort of criticism of the sort of industrial capitalism with this image of the dark satanic mills, I think really does resonate with some of the other themes that we get in the course of the film. In particular, there's this interesting scene that, in a way, almost didn't, like the first time I saw it, didn't seem to quite fit in with the rest of the film. There's a scene of Stephen driving, and his mother's driving, and he's riding along in the car, and she is obviously very concerned with this new sort of rebelliousness in Stephen, maybe not so much for its own sake, but because of what it implies, the way that it will compromise his future, and her fear that he's going to end up working on a factory, or an assembly line, which she uses the image of the belt, like the belt in a factory system. And she says, "The belt moves on, regardless of the needs of men. It gets at his heart. His life's whole rhythm gets chained to the machine. It's called productivity, Stephen. All day long, the ambulances here are never still." But I think the most striking and radical expression of this theme of the disobedience and rebellion against what sometimes in the film is referred to as the monolith, this idea of power and authority of the state, of the church, of the military, its connection also to industrial capitalist production and to consumer capitalism, and the kind of dumbing down or numbing and blinding effect of the media and the contemporary entertainment at the time. I think the most radical and striking expression of this theme comes from a conversation that Stephen has with Mr. Arn when Stephen comes to take back the place name book that Arn had borrowed from Stephen's father. So here at this point in the film, Stephen is, if not exactly on board with everything Arn is saying, he's at least dropped the hostility that he displayed at the beginning of the film, and is now able to be receptive and to listen to Arn's message here. So Arn says, "We're consumers, blind gaping holes at the end of the production line for stuffing with trash. Our taskmasters know Hitler or Stalin or Mao, but our own management class." And then he goes on and says, there's one hope for man only, that when the great concrete megacity chokes the globe from pole to pole, it shall already have, bedded in some hidden crack, the sacred seed of its own disintegration and collapse. Disobedience, chaos. Out of these alone can some new experiment in human living be born. So I think the thing that's really, this championing of disobedience and chaos, and this really kind of radical expression of almost an anarchist kind of expression of rebellion here, is striking enough on its own. But I think the most important detail here is that Arn presents in a kind of ultimate dystopian vision of the future, where the concrete mega city chokes the globe from pole to pole, when the monolith becomes absolute and sort of universal and omnipresent and absolute in its power, it will still contain contradiction. That the light can never fully banish the darkness, that the flame is always there in the mud and in the fen, and that hidden within any order, no matter how domineering and total and powerful, will always contain its own contradiction, and that in that contradiction there is always hope for the disintegration and collapse of that system. I just love that line, that bedded in some hidden crack, the sacred seed of its own disintegration and collapse. That there's something, perhaps that idea of a hidden sacred seed, resonates also with that the primal genie of the land, or the presence of King Penda, forgotten and buried within the land. That part of what always needs to be unburied and recovered is this possibility of rebellion and revolution and resistance to domineering authority. All right, and now I'm realizing I lied, and we are going to look at just one more line from Stephen's conversation with his father there that we've seen a few times already. Now developing, I think, some of the same themes and ideas that we saw in the conversation with Arn and the conversation with his mother in the car there. We have Stephen's father saying here, "In this day of the mask, this day of corporation, man, what shall the self do then, poor thing?" The self meaning here something like the inauthentic inner truth of self, as opposed to the mask, to what we have to all become, or the role that we have to assume to exist within the society of our time. Obviously related here to that, in the Stephen's second dream with the cutting off of the hands, and that sort of image of the castration that we all submit to in our submission to, in obedience to authority, and our abandoning of those parts of ourselves that don't fit into the hegemonic order and the dominant culture in which we are embedded here. So what shall the self do then, poor thing, but curl away in from the poisoning wind and dream of some second coming man himself must bring about through some last disobedience and new resurrection. So again, touching on these themes of the revolutionary Jesus, and that we can't wait for an external salvation, but that we ourselves must bring about this new order, this disobedience of authority, which is also a regeneration and a renewal of human nature and society. All right, so we are now in place to move along to the final scene of the film and the conclusion of Stephen's journey of transformation, and the fullness of his initiation here in this last scene. So like any good coming-of-age story, of course, we don't get the totality of Stephen's story. This is really just the beginning of his story. We see him fully entered into this new worldview, his new understanding of himself, and the bringing to conclusion of this initiation, and his accepting the mantle of this new understanding that he has received and has uncovered, and then setting forth into the world to live out and embody these things that he has come to understand. So before we get right into the final scene, just looking one last time at the semiotic structure that I've been using to talk about this film here. So we're now going to get the final move in Stephen's journey from what is represented by the mother and father of England, and the dualistic conservative Christian worldview that they represent, and now he will move finally and definitively to what's represented by King Penda and the conjunction of mud and flame, and this new kind of pagan, disobedient, revolutionary dialectical worldview. So the scene opens with Stephen sitting up in the Malvern Hills, looking out over the landscape and contemplating. This scene is staged as if as if everything that's happening here is happening in Stephen's imagination. I mean, he's really sitting up in the hills, but the figures that will appear here are, visionary. He's undergoing a kind of waking vision, and that this is all happening within himself and within his own imagination. So split into two parts. First, this final trial that he undergoes at the hands of the mother and father of England, who approach him and attempt to tempt him and to persuade him to return to his older worldview, the sort of Christian dualistic morality and everything that comes with it, and the kind of worldly power and significance, that sort of central status within his society that Stephen had desired, rather than this new outsider status that he's increasingly been pushed into. So the father of England gestures out over the landscape, really just sort of abbreviating what happens here, but he gestures out over the landscape and says, tempts Stephen with power here and earthly power, in a really nice echo of the way that Satan tempts Christ in the New Testament, and says, "Look, your inheritance, the kings of the earth you can govern. Power, Stephen, to turn the rock of the world to wealth. Power, to fall and not to die, like Joan the maid, to fall and not to die," which is nice callback here to the discussion of Joan of Arc that Stephen and his father had here. And I think this is also an interesting expression of the power is two things. Power, kind of this worldly power, to turn the rock of the world to wealth, to produce wealth and power within the world. But then this power is also the power of the Christian promise of eternal life and continued existence after death. I think it's quite interesting to see those linked together here, though I think by this point in the film it makes sense why they would be, with all especially the more political and social and kind of anti-hierarchical and anti-church sentiments that have been expressed so far here. Right, and then the mother of England attempts to tempt and persuade him as well, sort of appealing to her or their need for him and the importance that he plays in their mission. She says, "You have to come with us. You are a child of light. You have to be born in us. Then you become pure light." And it is at this point that Stephen, who has been struggling throughout this time to be able to say anything, he's been listening and kind of shaking his head, attempting to refuse what they're offering, but hasn't been able to speak. And now, finally, his refusal bursts out here in this really remarkable little speech that he gives, saying, "I am nothing pure, nothing pure. My race is mixed, my sex is mixed. I am woman and man, light with darkness, mixed. I am nothing special, nothing pure. I am mud and flame." So by this point in the video, obviously, the significance of this is clear, but it's just nice to have that his transformation and this understanding, stated so powerfully and so explicitly here. And then with his total rejection, the mother and father of England quickly shift from attempting to bring them onto his side, and in keeping with their total oppositional dualistic worldview, decide that if he can't be brought over to the side of light, then he will go to the side of darkness, and that can't happen, and so he must be destroyed. And so as Stephen flees from them, really nice kind of example of sympathetic magic here. They take a Polaroid photograph of him and then light the photograph on fire, which causes him to also burst into flames. And so he collapses to the ground, beginning to burn and in agony, and he calls upon King Penda. And with his call to Penda, the mother and father of England burst into flames, as we see in the still on the left, and then in the flames, or out of those flames that are the destruction of the mother and father of England, and everything that they've represented, and the hold of those things over Stephen. Now King Penda now appears out of the flames. All right, and then we get Penda first gives a kind of speech while Stephen stands a bit lower down on the hill. And let's see, Penda says, "This land we love must live. Her deep, dark flame must never die. Your land and mine goes down into a darkness now, but the flame still flickers in the fen. You are marked down to cherish that. Cherish the flame till we can safely wake again. The flame is in your hands. We trust it to you, our sacred demon of ungovernableness." So here, Stephen is given the kind of revelation of his mission, that he is a guardian or a keeper of this flame, and of this vision of a rebellious, disobedient, but also regenerative, spirituality. But it's also a fairly dark vision here now too. Penda saying your land and mine goes down into a darkness now. That it's not like everything is solved and everything's fixed and the world is going to be transformed. Things are going to get even worse, if anything. It's just that Stephen now understands that he is part of a line of transmission, a keeper of the flame, who that's been given to him to keep and to pass on until the time when these ancient buried forces can return in their fullness. Powerful lines here that that we've already seen that really emphasize the deep dark flame, the flame still flickering in the fen. Again, this conjunction of darkness and light, of mud and flame, of the power and the sort of rebellious, revolutionary, regenerative power that dwells within the earth and these ancient forgotten traditions. And this line of the sacred demon of ungovernableness is a really great line there. And then finally, Stephen draws closer to King Penda, who lays his hand on Stephen's head. And we see that Penda's hand is wounded and bloodied here, so being another recurrence of that motif of the wounded hand or the wounded foot, as we saw in the scene of the church. So connecting Penda to the previous appearances of that image, obviously connecting him to not the official institutional Jesus, but this sort of pagan, revolutionary Jesus. Also connecting him or calling back to the wounded hand of the young man, the teenager from the car earlier, who is wounded by his sort of stumbling into some part of the military installation there, who has that vision of the man in the fire, presumably Penda, being that man in the fire. Right, so calling back to all of that, Penda's bloodied hand is laid on Stephen's head in what is clearly a gesture of, is a laying on of hands and a kind of spiritual transmission, a transmission of a kind of blessing or a spiritual destiny, or however exactly we want to think of it. But certainly an incredibly potent image, of the culmination of this initiation that he's been undergoing, where he receives the laying on of hands from an ancient pagan king. And Penda then delivers his blessing and sort of instructions to Stephen here, and says, "Stephen, be secret. Child, be strange. Dark, true, impure, and dissonant. Cherish our flame. Our dawn shall come." All right, so that wraps up our discussion of Penda's Fen. Hopefully it's clear why I think this is a significant a cultural work and a significant example of esotericism in the arts and in culture. And why I think also it's quite significant that this film is being rediscovered, in the last 10 years since its wider availability, since it's been put out on DVD and getting more attention. I think that it really stands out as ahead of its time, especially the way it interweaves some of these pagan and spiritual themes with an ecological awareness, and the connection between those themes and psychogeography and a really radical leftist perspective, which are all things that this channel, this project of mine is quite interested in. We'll certainly be coming back to and touching on again and again in future videos and future series. And for me, anyways, Penda's Fen is an important artifact within that conversation and field of inquiry and work. So, of course, there's lots of other dimensions of Penda's Fen that we didn't really develop here, things that were less relevant to the particular project of this channel. So if you want to sort of follow up on, or just read some good writings on Penda's Fen and maybe follow up on some of those other dimensions that I didn't touch on here, I definitely recommend picking up a copy of Mud and Flame, which is a collection of essays on the film put out by Stranger Tractor Press. The book was unavailable for quite a while, you had to pay after it went. The initial printing run sold out. Used copies of it were selling for rather a lot online, but it's now available in a print-on-demand edition, so easy and affordable to get a hold of. So I definitely recommend that. Also, anything else written by David Rudkin is definitely worth checking out. Penda's Fen really stands out for me as special and powerful among his works, but definitely everything else I've read or seen of his has definitely been compelling and worthwhile. And I would recommend, in particular, if you want to develop some of the same themes and ideas that we find in images that we find in Penda's Fen, definitely recommend his earlier play, A Fortnight Comes, and then a play written just a couple years after Penda's Fen, The Sons of Light. So definitely recommend checking out those or anything else you can find of his. All right, so I'll be back soon with maybe we'll talk about Sun Ra and the film Space is the Place for the next video. I haven't quite decided yet, but that will definitely be coming soon if it won't be the very next video that we do here. And yeah, see you next time.